Elizabeth Whitaker had always believed in fairy tales. Growing up in a modest home in South Carolina, she dreamed of the life she now had: a loving husband, a cozy two-story house in the suburbs of Wilmington, and a career that brought her both pride and praise. At 28, she was exactly where she thought she should be. Married to Daniel Whitaker, her high school sweetheart, life had unfolded just as she'd planned. Friends envied their connection, their matching smiles in social media photos, their carefully curated life that looked almost too good to be true. And perhaps it was, you are watching The Crime Secret, where we bring you 2 thrilling and shocking crime stories every day. Please subscribe, like, and share so you never miss a video, thank you. Daniel was the dependable type, grounded, polite, and methodical in everything he did. He was the quiet force behind the Whitaker Construction Company, working closely with his father, Richard, who had built the business from the ground up. Together, they were a powerful team, respected by clients and feared by competitors. Richard Whitaker, now in his early 50s, was the kind of man who filled any room he walked into. With salt and pepper hair, a firm handshake, and a voice that commanded attention, he was admired by many, including Elizabeth. Elizabeth often found herself attending company functions, helping decorate new project sites, or advising on aesthetic details that clients loved. It started small, just compliments and friendly conversations between her and Richard. He'd praise her design taste, her eye for detail, the way she made a house feel like a home. She found herself drawn to the way he carried himself, confident but never boastful, charming but never crass. There was a confidence in him that Daniel lacked, a certainty that Elizabeth hadn't realized she craved. At first, she thought it was nothing. Harmless admiration. She was a married woman, and he was her father-in-law. But admiration turned to fascination, and fascination slowly, dangerously, began to feel like desire. The more time they spent together, the more she realized how little attention Daniel gave her anymore. He was always busy, always tired, always preoccupied with work. Their conversations had become shallow, their intimacy mechanical. What once felt electric between them now felt routine. Elizabeth convinced herself that she wasn't doing anything wrong by simply enjoying someone else's attention. Richard, on his part, wasn't oblivious. He saw the way she looked at him, the way her gaze lingered longer than necessary. It was intoxicating. For a man approaching the latter half of his life, the attention of a younger, beautiful woman was more than flattering, it was addictive. He hadn't planned it either, but sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones that slip in quietly, without warning. By the time either of them realized how far they had fallen, it was already too late. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And the life Elizabeth thought she had, the perfect marriage, the safe home, the beautiful dream, had already started to unravel, thread by thread, beneath the surface. No one saw it coming. Not even her. It started with glances. Then lingering touches during meetings, accidental brushes of hands, and private conversations that grew longer with every passing day. Elizabeth told herself it was still innocent, that nothing had truly happened. But deep down, she knew she was playing with fire. The thrill of secrecy gave her something she hadn't felt in years, not just excitement, but validation. For so long, she had felt invisible in her marriage. Daniel was dependable, yes, but distant. He was more invested in spreadsheets and building permits than in her. With Richard, she felt seen. Richard was aware of the risk. He knew what was at stake: his marriage, his relationship with his son, and the reputation of his business. But he let it continue. He told himself he was just mentoring her, helping her find her place in the company. But the way he looked at her, the way his eyes softened when she entered a room, betrayed his real feelings. The boundary blurred so gradually that neither of them could point to the exact moment they crossed it. But once they did, they crossed it completely. The first time it happened was at a conference in Charlotte. They had been assigned to present together on modern renovation trends. After a long day of meetings, they had dinner, shared wine, and returned to the hotel late. In the quiet hallway outside her room, he leaned in closer than necessary. The air between them was charged, neither speaking, both waiting. And then, without thinking, they kissed. It was brief, but it was enough. Enough to make everything real. Enough to make everything dangerous. From that point on, the affair intensified quickly. They began planning work trips they didn't need. Lunches turned into hours at motels tucked away off the interstate. They used burner phones to communicate, deleted messages obsessively, and promised each other it would just be a phase, something they'd end before anyone got hurt. But the truth was, neither of them wanted it to end. It had become too consuming, too magnetic. For Richard, it was a second youth. For Elizabeth, it was the attention she'd been starving for. At home, Daniel started to feel it. Elizabeth was present, but not really there. She no longer asked about his day. She avoided intimacy. Her excuses grew thinner, her mood swings sharper. He noticed small things, receipts that didn't match her stories, missed calls from unknown numbers, the way she smiled a little too easily at his father during family dinners. But every time suspicion crept in, he pushed it away. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't. The thought of his wife and his father together was too vile, too impossible. But lies have a shelf life. And the more they tried to hide it, the more obvious it became. The affair, once thrilling, began to rot from within. Jealousy seeped in. Guilt took hold. Every secret look carried weight. Every touch left a stain. And while they continued to act like nothing had changed, everything had. They were no longer hiding an affair, they were building a ticking bomb, and it was only a matter of time before it exploded. Daniel's unease turned into obsession. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't focus at work. The questions in his mind never stopped, whispers of doubt that grew louder every day. He started watching Elizabeth more closely, noticing patterns in her behavior he'd once ignored. She was always distracted. Her phone was glued to her hand. She would leave the room to take calls and delete messages the moment she read them. She stopped making eye contact when she spoke to him. Something had shifted, and the space between them now felt like a canyon. Still, Daniel clung to hope. He suggested counseling, even offered to take time off from work to travel, to reconnect. Elizabeth agreed half-heartedly, but always found reasons to delay. She said she was busy with new projects, working late with his father on a high-end renovation across town. That phrase, working with your father, began to echo in his head like a taunt. What once had made him proud now made him feel sick. He started to remember things differently, the way Richard looked at her across the dinner table, the time they laughed too hard at a private joke, the strange silence that would follow whenever he entered the room. One night, Daniel decided he couldn't take the guessing anymore. While Elizabeth slept, he opened her phone. The messages were gone, deleted, as he expected. But on a hunch, he checked their home security app. Richard had installed the system himself, complete with indoor and outdoor cameras. Most people forgot the cameras were even there. But Daniel hadn't. And neither had the system. What he found shattered him. A week-old clip showed Elizabeth entering the house midday when she should have been at work. Minutes later, Richard arrived. They walked in like they owned the place, laughing, her hand slipping into his. Then, the kiss. Long familiar. Without hesitation. There was no room for interpretation. The evidence was final. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark, staring at the walls, his mind racing with pain and fury. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was surgical. His wife and his own father. The two people who were supposed to be the pillars of his life had become the architects of his collapse. He thought about confronting them, screaming, demanding explanations. But no amount of screaming could unsee what he saw. In the days that followed, he withdrew. He barely spoke to Elizabeth, who seemed too wrapped in her double life to notice. At work, he avoided Richard, claiming illness. But underneath the silence, something was growing inside him, something colder than sadness, heavier than rage. He began to plan, not out of impulse, but out of desperation. He wasn't thinking of revenge. He was thinking of relief. He wanted the pain to stop, the lies to end. He wanted to undo what had already been done. And in his heart, a single, terrifying thought took root: if the truth could destroy everything, maybe destruction was the only way to take back control. The rain came down in sheets the night Daniel drove to the lake house. It was the family's retreat, a quiet place surrounded by trees and silence, miles away from the city and any unexpected visitors. Richard had gone there alone that weekend, under the pretense of overseeing repairs to the dock. But Daniel knew better. He knew Elizabeth had been there the weekend before. He knew the pattern now: the quiet getaways, the fake schedules, the excuses that no longer held weight. The lake house was no longer a family sanctuary. It was a hideaway for betrayal. Daniel's car cut through the wet darkness, headlights barely illuminating the narrow road. His hands gripped the wheels so tightly they ached. The pistol sat in the glove compartment, untouched until now, though its presence had haunted him for days. It wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was the end of a slow burn, the final act of a story that had left him hollow. He didn't want to hurt anyone. But he couldn't live inside this nightmare anymore. The storm outside matched the storm inside him, wild, consuming, unstoppable. When he arrived, the house was dark except for a dim light glowing from the living room window. The reflection of rain danced across the glass. He parked a distance away and walked up the gravel path, barely hearing his footsteps over the roar of the storm. The door was unlocked. That small detail, so ordinary, struck him. Richard had always been cautious. But here, he felt untouchable. Safe. As if no one would ever think to bring confrontation to this place. What happened inside those walls would never be fully known. No one heard an argument. No one saw a struggle. But what is certain is this: by morning, Richard Whitaker was dead, slumped in the corner of the living room with a bullet wound to the chest. There were no signs of forced entry. No fingerprints except Daniel's. And no one else had been seen entering or leaving the area that night. The sheriff who arrived at the scene described the house as quiet, almost peaceful, except for the blood. Daniel was gone. For 3 days, authorities searched for him. News of the killing spread quickly. Successful businessmen found dead in Lake House, the headlines read at first. But when details leaked, the narrative shifted. Family affair ends in tragedy. Then came the full revelation: the affair between Elizabeth and Richard, the betrayal, the footage, the heartbreak. The public devoured the story, scandalous, sensational, and brutal. The perfect family had crumbled into chaos. On the 3rd day, Daniel walked into a police station 5 counties away. He turned himself in without resistance. He had no bags, no lawyer, no emotion. He simply said his name, confirmed what they already knew, and waited. His mugshot showed a man with hollow eyes and an unreadable expression. When asked why he did it, he gave only one answer, quiet and final: because they left me with nothing. The trial gripped the nation like a storm, tearing apart everything that was left of the Whitaker family's reputation. The courtroom was filled with tension, reporters, neighbors, and strangers all eager to hear the details of the scandal and the murder. Elizabeth's confession about the affair stunned everyone, but it was Daniel's silence and somber demeanor that drew the most attention. He didn't deny his actions. He didn't argue or plead for mercy. His lawyer painted a picture of a man broken by betrayal, pushed to the edge by the collapse of everything he had believed in. The prosecution focused on the murder charge, arguing that Daniel's actions were cold and calculated. They said his pain did not justify taking a life. The defense, however, painted a different picture, one of emotional torture, of a man overwhelmed by years of deception and heartbreak. The jury struggled to understand how a man could kill his own father to end his own suffering. The verdict was guilty, but with a sentence that reflected the complexity of the case: 25 years for second-degree murder. After the trial, Elizabeth disappeared from the public eye. The woman who had once been so full of life and dreams retreated into anonymity. She moved far away, changed her name, and devoted herself to helping others, working at a women's shelter, counseling those who faced hardship and abuse. Her past remained a heavy burden, but she sought to find some kind of redemption through service, hoping to heal the wounds she had helped create. Daniel's life behind bars was not the end of his story. Prison forced him to confront his pain and anger every single day. Over time, he found a new purpose: speaking to fellow inmates about the dangers of silence, the importance of facing emotions before they spiral out of control, and the power of forgiveness, even when it seems impossible. He became a mentor, helping others avoid the mistakes he made. His story became a powerful warning, a reminder of how unchecked emotions can lead to destruction. Outside prison walls, the Whitaker name faded, becoming a cautionary tale whispered in small towns and online forums. Their story was retold not just as a scandal or a crime, but as a lesson about the fragility of trust, the cost of secrecy, and the need for honest communication. It showed how the people we love most can sometimes be the ones who hurt us deepest, but also how pain can be transformed into growth. The tragedy that destroyed the Whitaker family left scars that may never fully heal. But it also sparked conversations about mental health, family dynamics, and the importance of seeking help before it's too late. In a world where perfect appearances often mask broken realities, their story serves as a stark reminder that no one is immune to struggle, and that sometimes, the hardest battles are fought within. From the ruins of betrayal and loss, there is hope, hope that others can learn, heal, and find strength in vulnerability. The Whitaker's story may have ended in tragedy, but it also opened a door for change, proving that even in the darkest moments, there is a chance for rebirth.